Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and later on our podcast channel. If that is where you're listening through, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. I'm Andrew Musgrove and I'm joined by Mark Douglas. It is just moments after the preliminary hearing to Newcastle United's CAT case against the Premier League regarding the Saudi-backed takeover is finished, wrapped up. There's not going to be a decision made today on whether the case gets a date to go ahead, gets delayed, gets thrown out. That's going to happen over the next days, potentially weeks, while the man in charge makes his decision and will give us a summary when he does have a decision. Mark, there was plenty to discuss about what's happened this afternoon, plenty of key points. I guess the first place to start is the fact that we have a date confirmed for the arbitration. This is the other legal avenue Mike Ashley is going down to try and get this takeover passed through, and it is the 3rd of January, although someone has just pointed out that the 3rd of January might actually be a bank holiday, so it's likely to be the 4th, but nonetheless, we have a date, and that is probably the biggest thing to take away from today.
Yeah, I think arbitration is much more likely to settle the key issues, which was referred to time and time again in the CAT case, which is effectively the separation of whether PIF is separate from the Saudi state. This was the first time I think that we've heard publicly some of those arguments. Obviously, it's been very well reported for a long time that the separation issue is very much the one that will that has been the key sticking point that has stopped this takeover from going through. But now we've got that, in very much certain terms that is the case. So the arbitration really is the route that's going to settle that. An independent arbitration will decide whether that's the case or not, and will decide whether the Saudi state has to go through the owners and directors test. And obviously, if the Saudi state is judged to be a director of Newcastle United, then the takeover will not happen because they do not want to go through the owners and directors test. So in that sense, we have clarity on when it is, which is good, because previously we'd only heard it was early 2022. And I think that's what everybody needs now. We've all sat through, well, not all of us, but thousands of us, as was said at the end, have sat through sort of almost 8 hours of evidence today, 8 hours of arguments by QCs for St James's Holdings Limited, which is Mike Ashley's holding company that owns Newcastle United and the Premier League. And how much longer and how many more of these things can we have before we actually get a decision? I mean, today was fascinating because it was the first time anybody's really talked in public and in the open about this whole takeover deal. And for me, that's absolutely scandalous that this is the first time. We're almost 15 to 16 months on from when the initial deal broke, and this is the first time that anybody's ever really talked about some of the substantive issues behind it. So kudos to pushing through the CAT case, because it is the first time that any fan has heard these arguments go through, but it shouldn't come to that.
Definitely seems like the arbitration is going to be, as you say, the main route. I mean, the argument today put forward by St James's Holding Limited's QC, Daniel Jarrell, seems to be that he wants, obviously, to see this competition case given the green light by the CAT tribunal panel, but not to get a start date until after the arbitration is concluded, at which that point he says the case may or may not go ahead. He's talking about the CAT case there, and he would take stock, or we would take stock, as in the Newcastle United legal team, which is very interesting because basically I think both sides are actually arguing that the arbitration is the main point, and this CAT case is kind of a side avenue. It's just interesting that one wants a delay and one wants an actual start date.
Yeah, and what was really interesting, I think, was that the Premier League and the St James's Holdings legal teams arguing over points that substantive points of difference in their two opinions. So, for example, we know that Newcastle United, people around the consortium and all those kinds of have briefed that the PIF are still interested, or they certainly have been until fairly recently. But yet you had St James Holdings Limited arguing that the PIF might not be interested still, even if arbitration goes for them. Now, for me, as an onlooker, that looked as if that was making that argument to try and convince the panel that this CAT case has to go through, rather than necessarily, that being the belief of the consortium. Because I still think personally from what I've heard, that the PIF would come back to the table if the arbitration goes the way of Newcastle United. But obviously, you're seeing a different argument put to the panel today, and that was fascinating to me. But yeah, I think arbitration has to be the only. It's the only route really, because it's the one that is going to come up with a binding decision. Obviously, you can still probably challenge the arbitration, but you're running out of avenues to go through then. And I think pretty much if the arbitration goes against the consortium, I think what will happen is then that, we will start to see Mike Ashley exploring other avenues to sell. And you saw today, there was very much a hints from the legal team of St James's Holding that there have been credible offers for the football club below the amount that Mike Ashley wants to sell at. That's part of the case, is that if he ends up selling at a lower price, he will look for compensation from the Premier League. So that was another interesting point. That it might not be that this consortium gets their hands on Newcastle United, but the other thing for me that I thought was very interesting was the Premier League referenced time, several times, that they felt that this the whole point of this CAT case was to exert pressure on them. That's their opinion, to try and in some ways get the arbitration to go the way of Newcastle United and St James's Holding. So again, another thing that I think that's been reported quite a lot. Very interesting that on a day when a lot of people had said nothing will be said, nothing will be. Quite a lot of the reporting around it, quite a lot of the things that we've said, the analysis that we've had of it, was there. What a lot of people now would say, well, that's not new information, but it was confirmed in this case. And you've got to remember that for all of us sitting here saying, look, I thought genuinely interesting. I don't know what people at home thought. I thought there was some quite big revelations there, which I wasn't expecting actually. But a lot of the really juicy stuff was confidential still today. So there was a reference at one point to the evidence provided by Mike Ashley. I mean, I would absolutely love to read that evidence. It would be, I think you'd probably have scoops for days, and you'd probably be assured the Sports Reporter of the Year award right there if you got your hands on that and were able to publish it without breaching any confidentiality. Of course, you can't. But that will be absolutely fascinating if we hear that, because Mike Ashley talking about this takeover in detail is that manna from heaven. He's not actually spoken about it, and I would think he's got some very, very strong opinions on it.
So let's just talk about what kind of both sides wanted. We've briefly spoken about it, but we'll just be clear here. So it seems to be St James's Holding Limited want a start date given for this competition case, but not until after arbitration. The Premier League are arguing that the case should be delayed, not necessarily thrown out by how I interpret it, but delayed until after arbitration, so they don't have to incur cost of the preparation for this competition case or distraction for the arbitration. And at that point, they seem confident, I think, that the arbitration will rule in their favour, and therefore the competition case may not go ahead. In their view, it's fine margins.
Yeah. Well, at the start of the day, there were two aspects to what they were arguing, which I think was why their case went so much longer than the St James's Holdings one did. And then the first one, they were actually arguing on jurisdiction. So they did say that they didn't think it didn't have merit. So there was that argument, and then they addressed the separate point, which was that, look, if you decide that it should go, it should be delayed. So there was two points there, and I think the first one was that this isn't with merit. It doesn't have any merit. That they don't believe that they have incurred any loss yet, because the decision hasn't been made. They're sort of saying, well, it's still going through the processes. So I thought that was quite interesting as well, because obviously we've been told, that it's dead in the water. And I think a lot of the things that people have said definitively about this takeover, listening to the evidence today, if you're to say this is dead, it's over, I don't think what we've heard today would tally with that personally. You may say that it's a lot of legal arguments and procedural and administrative, but it didn't feel like that to me. So I think that was the two arguments, and we'll see later. It feels to me as if that there's a decision there. There's three options for the panel. One, they throw it out full stop. Two, they delay it until after the arbitration. Or three, they let it run now. But obviously it will run, and it will probably happen simultaneously alongside the arbitration. But I could see how, from the arguments that Daniel Jowell came through with, how even if arbitration is thrown out, they're arguing that it should still run because there would potentially be compensation due to Mike Ashley. And of course, right at the start of it, when there was that skirmish over whether, is St James's Holdings Limited separate from Newcastle United, Daniel Jowell made it very clear that this is a case that Mike Ashley, when you talk about a £10 million loss, it's not to Newcastle United, it's to Mike Ashley. So a lot of very complex legal arguments, but that was my interpretation of it. Of course, we're allowed to give our interpretation of it because it's a panel that are making decisions, so we're not prejudicing the panel because they won't sit and listen to this and be prejudiced. But obviously, if it was a jury case, we'd have to sit on this. So quite interesting, really. A lot of legalese, something new in my journalism career. But yeah, it felt like it felt like there is one of, for me, it felt like there's one of three decisions that they can come to.
It seems like there's definitely maybe the beginning of the end, because it was mentioned by the Premier League's QC Adam Lewis that the arbitration could take as little as a week, and there's hope for a rapid conclusion. I saw a lot of people laughing at that statement. That rapid's the new imminence, apparently. But it's good that the hope is that a conclusion will come swiftly in January for the arbitration, because I think, and you've already mentioned it, Mark, we've gone through months and months of this, and I think everyone just wants a conclusion one way or the other. Some people asking, has today given you any confidence in terms that this is a good thing for the takeover?
Well, I think until we know, there's so much confidential. There was 2 or 3 points today where the live stream was taken off for confidential information. We don't know what that confidential information is. We don't know, is there some things that are going to be discussed in the arbitration, and bear in mind, one of the arguments for keeping arbitration confidential is that it enables both legal sides to have very frank and robust arguments. So I think there's probably still quite a lot that we don't know in terms of the arguments that have been made at arbitration. So in terms of knowing which way that decision is going to go, I don't think today's necessarily given us a lot of clarity. But I think what's really clear is that the basic and clear question that the arbitration is going to address is whether Saudi state is, can't be taken apart from PIF, and if it isn't, then that deal is over. So I suppose it depends, really. I've seen a lot of people saying, well, the chairman of PIF is the de facto ruler of the Saudi state, so how can you separate those two? But then on the other side, you've heard that the consortium have at times got clarification from the top courts in Saudi Arabia and delivered that to the Premier League, and why shouldn't that be enough? And I guess that's really why you've got the independent panel there, is that they can make that decision rather than the Premier League's own lawyers. So like you said, I think this needs to be resolved one way or another. The club are clearly being damaged in the meantime. I mean, it's been 15 months, and the way that the club is being at the moment is quite frankly, in my opinion, it feels like it's a bit of a ghost ship, really, and it's being left to, in Steve Bruce's words, tick along while this gets resolved. Now, that sounds in some ways, maybe it's a strategy that the club and Mike Ashley kind of think is a good way to keep this thing ticking along. But obviously, we know in reality it's falling behind, and the fact where they are in the league tells you exactly that. Because they are in a relegation fight again this year with a lot of other teams, to be fair. But it needs a resolution. And what was quite interesting was the Premier League said themselves, the resolution probably it'll take a week. It will be done, in their opinion, in time for the end of the transfer window in January, which was the intention in July. Now, obviously, if that was the intention in July, it did get pushed back. Could it get pushed back again? You never know, but you'd really hope it doesn't this time.
Yeah, hopefully we get a conclusion. It's interesting you mentioned the separation issue there, Mark. Mr. Lewis, the Premier League's QC, said today in the hearing that if the arbitration decides that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not a director, then the transaction can and will go ahead with no questions of the owners and directors test being applied to KSA. So, I mean, that's always seemingly been the big issue, and it goes back to what you've just said there, how people have said to people, how can you separate it? I'm often in that kind of party where you look at the website and he's top of the pyramid chain, and it's one of those questions which I guess only this panel at the arbitration will be able to rule on. Also interesting, Mark, that the St James's Holding QC, Daniel Jowell, made the claim that the Premier League threatened to kick Newcastle out of the competition. He said that they didn't follow through with their threat. What do you make of that claim?
Well, that was a stick of dynamite that was laid under the whole proceeding, wasn't it? A very, very interesting thing to hear, and probably shows. I mean, there wasn't a lot of context given to that. It was almost slipped in. My assumption would be that they were basically saying, if you you take us to CAT, then you are going outside the Premier League's rule books, and the ultimate sanction for going outside the Premier League rule books is that you can be thrown out of the competition. When the Premier League's Big Six have set up a competition outside the Premier League and effectively in the ESL that threatens the whole nature of the Premier League, and they have, as of yet, not been threatened with even points deductions. I find that absolutely astounding that was mentioned. Obviously, I think probably the Premier League, but I'm sure they won't respond to that because they'll hide behind the idea that it was, well, not hide behind, but they'll say, look, it's part of a court case. We can't comment on it. We don't want to register it. But that, for me, is a huge revelation. Realistic that they would do that? No, I don't think so, because it just doesn't seem to me like, as I said, if teams are setting up leagues that are outside the jurisdiction of a lot of these governing bodies, then how could you see them throwing Newcastle United out for taking them to court? But it does show how heated I think things have got behind the scenes. Obviously all parties are measured, I think, in what they say, although Mike Ashley's taken a few pops at the Premier League. But obviously behind the scenes, I think things have got very, very heated. And probably when all this ends and we get an idea of what's actually happened behind the scenes, it'll be very interesting to see, because I'm assuming a lot has gone on that we don't know about, and a lot of it will be pretty explosive stuff.
There's also the reference of BN, and we knew the accusations were there that of the lobbying. QC Daniel Jowell mentioned it today in the hearing, and he said, and I'm quoting now, at the time the Premier League was reaching its decision, that's on the takeover, BN was in the midst of negotiations with the Premier League for another 3-year rights deal. The factual foundation of the Premier League was improperly influenced, and it is not a fanciful one. It was very publicly reported at the time that BN Media Group actively lobbied the Premier League against the takeover of Newcastle. And I guess in many ways that seems to be the main foundation of Mike Ashley and St James's Holding Limited argument, that the Premier League was influenced by an outside body, and that is the main reason why the takeover didn't go through.
Yeah, obviously the beIN Sports, are a major partner for the Premier League. We saw what happened when Serie A started working with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, took their Italian Super Cup there. beIN Sports pulled out of the right to tender the Middle East rights for Serie A. So, is there some merit in that? I don't know. It's the argument that the QC's put across. No surprise, I think that is their argument. We knew that was something that Newcastle United were unhappy with. They were the only club out of the 20 that voted against the beIN Sports deal for the MENA rights for the next 3 years to go through. So it was pretty clear that was one of their arguments. But yeah, I mean, it's now out there. It's in public that's one of the things that they've said. Whether that's right or not, again, that will come out in the wash. I would assume if this CAT case goes through, that will be one of the major issues. But if this CAT case does go through, I think it probably times by 10 the kind of revelations and the interesting things that we've heard today. Probably times them by 10, because I think you will hear in full the Newcastle's argument for why this takeover didn't go through. And I would assume, like you said, that they will allege not only beIN Sports influence, but they also mentioned some members of the Premier League, lobbying as well, which again is something that has been mentioned in the past, but no meat on the bones of that one yet. And obviously all those people probably deserve a right to reply as well.
Another interesting point, just before you wrap up, obviously they've come into this and they're looking for damages. And one of the things that the hearing was speaking about was the market value of the club, and I think it was the price of the sale of the club. And it was referenced that it was kind of part of the sums was done on other offers that Mike Ashley had. So clearly there's interest from other parties, but his mindset is that he's going to sell it to the Saudi-backed consortium and nobody else. We've known that for months, and it was just interesting though to hear from the QC, who at least he inferred that there had been other interested parties who would come to Mike Ashley at some point over the last months, 18 months, whatever it is, to say, I would like to buy Newcastle United.
Yeah, I mean, the club could have been sold 3 or 4. Well, club could have been sold 10 times over since Mike Ashley. Since Mike Ashley took over to sort of credible people. We know that Manchester Davies already had one bid rejected. She's probably got in with others, I would think, before she got Saudi on the table. But Mike Ashley's sticking to his price. He's sticking to what he thinks he's got. He's managed to get it from a group that he thinks will take Newcastle United forward, and that's the big issue here, and that's why he hasn't sold to anybody else, because he feels like he has got on the table an offer from Saudi Arabia. But obviously, you heard another thing that was mentioned in there was, if the deal goes back on, would it be in different terms? Would it be in cheaper terms? It's in Mike Ashley's interest today to argue that he could potentially lose money on a deal that was gone on, because he wants to get this competition's case through. But yeah, I mean, he could have sold. And I think that's not a revelation to most of us. But yeah, probably the offers and getting those offers through has always been the big thing with Mike Ashley. And again, I think he's a difficult person to do business with when it comes to selling Newcastle United from all the information that we've heard.
Well, there we have it. Very interesting day. Mark, do you just want to sum up your thoughts on it? Just to give us a conclusion.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, what I'm pleased about is that there's been some clarity for Newcastle United fans. We've been talking about a lot of things over the course of 18 months, and there's been very little evidence, very little actual public discussion of it. I mean, to me, the big revelation is the arbitration date. Why that couldn't be communicated before now, I don't know. Why there can't be more public discussion of this, I don't know. Why has it had to come to this? Why have we had to sit around a live stream from a CAT case to find out some scraps of information about something that's absolutely huge for tens of thousands of people in the Northeast? I don't know. And that to me is the saddest thing about today, is that why does it take this for us to get some clarity? And why are the Premier League trying to keep so much of it confidential? And why is there not some form of system where this kind of thing can be played out a little bit in public?
Yeah, I'm just happy that we've got a date, and hopefully we will get a conclusion. I know every time I say this, people say, well, do you not want the takeover to go through? I just want this to end as a reporter and a fan as well, because we've been through it so long now that, like you say, if this avenue closes, there's a potential of a sale to another person who won't have to go through all this. And there are questions to be asked, but hopefully come the second week of January, we'll have some answers. Hopefully it'll be some positive ones, but nevertheless it'll be a closed chapter on what has been a tedious 12 months or so. Okay. You guys watching, go on, Mark, were you just agreeing with that point?
Yeah, no, I think tedious is the word. That's why I think probably we're all sitting here today. We undersold today, didn't we? We all said there was going to be nothing said. And there was probably the whole takeover saga. It's been oversold, hasn't it, a little bit, and nothing's actually happened. Whereas today you saw the opposite thing, where we said, nothing interesting to be said. And there was actually a few interesting things said, and that all important arbitration tape.
Most certainly. And to you guys watching, thank you very much to you guys listening later on the podcast. Please remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for tuning in. And head over to chroniclelive.co.uk, where we will have all the reaction to a very interesting day for Newcastle United regarding the Saudi-backed takeover. All the quotes and stuff from the CAT competition are up there on our website, and all the analysis from Mark, from Kieran and Lee as well will be up there. So please do go and check that out.